Frank Sinatra consistently denied being involved with the mafia, but was regularly seen socializing with its members. He's perhaps the earliest example of a gang-affiliated musician and how the worlds of organized crime and entertainment would work together. Frank Sinatra was born in Hoboken, New Jersey, and came from an Italian immigrant family. Sinatra's parents owned a bar when he was growing up, and it's been alleged that this was a hangout spot for prominent gangsters such as Meyer Lansky, Bugsy Siegel, and Dutch Schultz. This bar became Frank Sinatra's first stage where, as a young boy, he would stand on the counter and sing in the hopes of making tips. Sinatra did not take well to school and dropped out of high school after just 47 days. He later worked as a delivery boy and a riveter, but his clear passion was music, particularly swing music, which was popular at the time. While pursuing a musical career, Sinatra got to know a man named Willie Moretti, a prominent member of the Genovese crime family. Moretti started assisting Sinatra with getting his music career off the ground, and Sinatra would return the favor by singing at his daughter's wedding, amongst other favors. Eventually, Frank got his big break while getting to sing for the Tommy Dorsey Band. And as time went on, Sinatra was allowed to record solo singles. He was doing incredibly well, but was still bound by a contract where he had to forfeit a huge amount of his earnings to Tommy Dorsey. A legal battle ensued, and eventually, Sinatra managed to get out of his contract. And this is where the worlds of entertainment and crime would allegedly come together. J. Randy Taraborelli, who wrote a biography on Sinatra, claims that Frank got Moretti to assist with terminating this contract, and his negotiation tactics consisted of jamming the barrel of a gun into Jack Dorsey's mouth. Dorsey famously said about Sinatra, quote, "He's the most fascinating man in the world, but don't stick your hand in the cage." A particularly revealing moment happened in 1946 when Sinatra decided to perform a now infamous concert in Havana, Cuba. Frank was apparently completely oblivious to the fact that this was a historic conference for the Italian-American, Jewish, and Sicilian mobs. Sinatra's bodyguards were Charlie, Rocco, and Joseph Fischetti, all of whom were cousins of Al Capone, but the singer allegedly had no idea that this event was for the mafia. The manager at the hotel said Sinatra was spending most of his waking hours with Lucky Luciano and an assorted group of gamblers and hoodlums. When Sinatra was photographed shaking hands with Luciano, a notorious mobster, Sinatra responded, "I was brought up to shake a man's hand when I'm introduced to him, without first investigating his past." Another Sinatra biography by Douglas Thompson and Mike Rothmiller claims that Sinatra was invited to Cuba for more than his musical talents. They contend that he was a courier and was carrying $2 million worth of cash to the event. The mob believed that customs officers were more likely to ask for his autograph than search through his bags. And this is how the relationship worked. The mob were not just fans of Sinatra, but worked in a way that was mutually beneficial, allegedly speaking. In 1947, the journalist Lee Mortimer was looking into Sinatra's alleged ties to the mafia and was subsequently confronted by Sinatra. Writing for the Baltimore Sun, Mortimer said, "I was leaving Giro's with Miss Kay Kino, a band singer, when Sinatra and three men jumped me. The first thing I knew, I was on the floor, and the next thing I knew was when I saw a face that looked like Sinatra's above me." Sinatra's former manager told Page Six that mobsters would do favors for Sinatra, but with the intention of making him feel like he owed them something in return. He said, "Wise guys wanted to be in Frank's inner circle, and he did his best to juggle that and not let it get too heavy. But you know, some people would go overboard. Some of the guys became friends over the years, and they would try to do things for him that he never asked them to do. He'd say, 'If these guys really want to do me a favor, I wish they'd stop doing me favors.'" 1953 was when Sinatra's most vicious rumor began circulating. Sinatra's singing career hit a slump, so he got more into acting. He landed a role in the movie From Here to Eternity, and it was alleged that a mob boss helped secure this part for Frank with some rather forceful negotiating tactics. Another actor in contention for the role suddenly had scheduling conflicts too. And through this acting gig, he won an Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor.
The winner is Frank Sinatra.
So despite the nefarious means by which he allegedly got this role, he clearly more than deserved it. Frank was good friends with the comedian Phil Silvers, and Silvers' ex-wife claimed that both Phil and Frank had a sort of, quote, mob crush, or man crush, on the mob boss Bugsy Siegel. She said, "Phil and Frank admired and adored Bugsy Siegel so much. Frank and Phil would immediately stand up when he passed by and, with real reverence in their voices, said, quote, 'Hello, Mr. Siegel, how are you?' They were like two little children seeing Santa Claus, or two altar boys standing, paying homage to the Pope." In the 1960s, Sinatra was mixing in incredibly elite circles, to the extent that he was now friends with the Kennedy family. Sinatra began vocally supporting the Democratic Party and was involved in the successful presidential campaign of John F. Kennedy in 1960. The mob also assisted with this campaign, but this backfired when John F. Kennedy appointed his brother Robert Kennedy as Attorney General and wanted to crack down on the mob. If you're not convinced by now that Sinatra was at least close to the mafia, then see what you make of what happened in 1964. Frank Sinatra's son was kidnapped, and Frank's phone records show that the first person he called when this happened was Sam Giancana, a notorious mob boss. He then made another call to an alleged hitman. This was at a time when Sinatra was good friends with Robert Kennedy, the Attorney General of the United States. Thankfully, Frank's son was found and his abductors were arrested by the FBI, but his first port of call was the mob. In 1966, a then 50-year-old Frank Sinatra married the 21-year-old actress Mia Farrow. The comedian, Jackie Mason, thought this relationship was ripe for funny material and did a whole routine about how at the end of the night, Frank would take off his dentures while Mia would take off her braces. But while Mason was staying at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas, 3 shots went through his hotel room door. Mason survived the incident, but decided not to do any jokes about Frank Sinatra anymore. Like Tommy Dorsey before him, he had stuck his hand in the cage. And while Sinatra was constantly trying to silence rumors about his mob affiliations, a writer named Mario Puzo would go on to completely tarnish his reputation. If you don't recognize Puzo's name, you'll probably know his book and movie, The Godfather. The book was published in 1969, and the movie was out in cinemas by 1972. Although a work of fiction, the story has a character called Johnny Fontaine, a Sinatra-like singer who owes his success to the mob. Fontaine is performing at the wedding of the daughter of a mobster, something which Sinatra did too. The story showed how interconnected the mob was with the entertainment industry, and gave a nod and wink to Sinatra's involvement in organized crime. The very same rumor about Sinatra, that a mob boss intimidated to get him a movie role, was replicated in the story when Godfather Vito Corleone made
him an offer he couldn't refuse
to the head of a movie studio. In the movie, Vito's son Michael tells his new girlfriend Kay that a gun was held to the studio exec's head.
And my father assured him that either his brains or his signature would be on the contract.
Sinatra was aware of The Godfather from early on. Before the novel was even published, Mario received a letter, quote, from Sinatra's lawyers demanding to see the manuscript. While writing the screenplay, Sinatra is believed to have seen Mario at a restaurant and shouted, "Choke! Go ahead and choke." However, this story is believed to be more of an urban legend than something that actually happened. Mario wrote in 1972, "I remember that, contrary to his reputation, he did not use foul language at all. The worst thing he called me was a pimp, which rather flattered me since I've never been able to get a girlfriend to squeeze blackheads out of my back, much less hustle for me." In the late 70s, Sinatra knew that he had been monitored by the authorities. Through the Freedom of Information Act, Sinatra requested to see the files that the FBI had on him, and he was given them. These were not available to the public until his death in 1998, when the FBI received 30 Freedom of Information Act requests filed by news organizations. The files did not confirm that Sinatra was a member of the mob. The conclusion from these files is that Sinatra was an incredibly complicated figure, so much so that they wrote 1,275 pages on him. And looking back on these files, you could argue that the files paint the FBI in a worse light than Sinatra. Frank was a vocal anti-racist during the Civil Rights era, and they monitored his activism in this area because they felt that it could lead to him becoming a communist. And contrary to his reputation as a mobster, Sinatra offered to be an informant for the FBI in the 50s, but was rejected. However, the files had mounds upon mounds of information about Sinatra socializing with well-known mobsters. The LA Times reported, growing up, Bugsy Siegel invited Sinatra to the opening of the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas in 1946. Luciano listed him in his address book in 1949. Sam Giancana, Vito Genovese, and Thomas Lucchese were his guests in Atlantic City, New Jersey in 1959. James John Warjack, who had made it to the FBI's most wanted list, had a picture of Sinatra dealing blackjack. Joe Vichetti dined with him in Miami in 1968. The files said that Sinatra and mobster Sam Giancana had competitions to see how many drinks they could buy for their friends at a party at Chicago, but Sinatra maintained that Sam was just someone he met at an airport. As well as hanging out with famous mobsters, the files also revealed that Sinatra was also organizing discreet parties with John F. Kennedy, where several sex workers were also in attendance. The FBI were deeply worried that Sinatra was being used as an intermediary between the mob and the president and the dangers that could lead to. In the eyes of the authorities, Sinatra was not a criminal but a security issue. Over the pond, British officials were not okay with Sinatra performing in front of Queen Elizabeth. Frank was also not allowed to perform for the US troops during the Korean War. But despite the mountain of information the FBI had on Sinatra, they had no charges against him. Sinatra could have been a member of the mob, or he could have been forced to placate the mob. Or like a lot of people, he just seemed to have a bunch of sketchy friends in high places. One thing is for sure though, that he led one incredibly mysterious as well as interesting life. Make sure to subscribe for more.